My father-in-law tried to bribe me to leave his daughter, so I took his money and told her everything. I never thought I'd be writing this story, but here we are 3 months later, and I'm still processing everything that happened. The whole situation started innocently enough when my girlfriend and I decided to move in together after dating for 2 years. We found this perfect little apartment downtown, nothing fancy, but it had character and was within our budget. Her father had always been polite to me, maybe a bit distant, but I figured that was normal for protective dads. The first red flag should have been when he insisted on helping us move, bringing his own crew of workers instead of letting us handle it ourselves like we planned. He kept making comments about the neighborhood, pointing out every small flaw in the building, questioning whether we'd really thought this through. My girlfriend just rolled her eyes and told me he was always like this, overly concerned about details. I thought it was sweet that he cared so much, even if his delivery was a bit intense. Things got stranger when he started showing up unannounced at our new place, always with some excuse about checking on something or bringing us groceries we didn't need. He'd walk around the apartment like he was inspecting it, asking about our finances, our future plans, whether we were really ready for this step. My girlfriend would get frustrated with these visits, but she'd always end up talking to him privately while I stayed in another room, feeling like an outsider in my own home. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening when I was alone at the apartment, working on my laptop while my girlfriend was at her evening classes. I heard a knock at the door and assumed it was a neighbor or delivery person. Instead, I found her father standing there with a serious expression, wearing one of his expensive suits like he'd come straight from some important meeting. He asked if he could come in to talk, and something in his tone made me nervous, but I stepped aside and let him enter. He sat down on our couch without being invited, looked around the room one more time, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. The way he held it, the weight of it in his hands, immediately told me this wasn't a card or letter. He placed it on the coffee table between us and said he had a proposition for me. My heart started racing because I knew whatever was coming next would change everything between us. He explained that he'd been watching our relationship, evaluating whether I was right for his daughter, and he'd come to the conclusion that I wasn't good enough for her future. He said it wasn't personal, that I seemed like a nice enough guy, but that his daughter deserved someone who could provide better opportunities, more stability, a different kind of life than what I could offer. The envelope contained $25,000 in cash, and it was mine if I agreed to break up with her and disappear from her life completely. I sat there staring at the envelope, not believing what I was hearing, trying to process the fact that this man had brought actual money to buy me out of his daughter's life. He kept talking, explaining how I could use the money to start over somewhere else, maybe go back to school, invest in my future, anything I wanted as long as it didn't include his daughter. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor, giving me an opportunity to better myself. The most insulting part was how matter-of-fact he was about the whole thing, like he was negotiating a business deal rather than trying to destroy his daughter's relationship. He pulled out a piece of paper with what looked like a contract, outlining the terms of our agreement, including a clause that I would never contact her again or tell anyone about this arrangement. He had actually consulted someone to draft this document, which meant he'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. I felt anger building up inside me, but I also felt something else, something calculating and cold that surprised me. Instead of immediately throwing him out or refusing his offer, I found myself asking questions about the details, playing along with his scheme while my mind raced with possibilities. I asked him why he was so convinced I wasn't right for his daughter, what specifically made him think she'd be better off without me. He launched into this whole speech about social compatibility, financial security, family backgrounds, and future potential, like he was reading from some handbook about arranged marriages. He mentioned that there were other young men in their social circle who would be much better matches for his daughter, people from similar families who understood what was expected of them. The way he talked about his own daughter, like she was a prize to be won by the highest bidder, made my skin crawl. But here's where things took an unexpected turn that even I didn't see coming. I told him I needed time to think about his offer, that this was a big decision and I couldn't just agree to it on the spot. He seemed pleased that I was taking it seriously, probably thinking he'd found my price and it was just a matter of finalizing the details. He said he'd give me a week to consider everything, but that the offer wouldn't stay on the table indefinitely. After he left, I sat alone in the apartment staring at that envelope full of money, feeling like I was in some weird movie where nothing made sense anymore. Part of me wanted to tear it up and throw it away, but another part of me was curious about what would happen if I actually went through with his plan. I spent the next few hours pacing around the apartment, trying to figure out what to do with this information and how to handle the situation. When my girlfriend came home that night, she immediately noticed something was wrong with me, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her what had happened. I made up some excuse about having a rough day at work, but I could tell she wasn't buying it. She kept asking if everything was okay, if something had happened while she was gone, but I just kept deflecting her questions and changing the subject. The next few days were torture because I had to act normal around her while carrying this huge secret about what her father had done. Every time she mentioned him or talked about family plans, I felt like I was going to explode with the truth. I kept thinking about how hurt she'd be if she knew what kind of person her father really was, how he viewed her relationship and her ability to make her own choices. Meanwhile, her father started calling me, checking in on my decision, reminding me about the deadline he'd given me. He'd text me at random times during the day, asking if I'd had time to consider his proposal, whether I had any additional questions about the arrangement. The pressure was getting to me, and I started making mistakes at work, forgetting appointments, losing focus on everything except this impossible situation. Then came the moment that changed everything and set off a chain of events I never could have predicted. I was at the grocery store, standing in the checkout line with a cart full of food for dinner, when I overheard two women talking behind me about some family drama they were dealing with. One of them was saying how her sister's boyfriend had been acting strange lately, and she suspected that their father had done something to interfere with the relationship. Something about their conversation triggered a realization in me that I'd been approaching this whole situation wrong. Instead of being the victim of this man's manipulation, I could turn the tables and use his own scheme against him. I started thinking about what would happen if I took his money but didn't actually break up with his daughter, or if I told her everything and let her decide how to handle her father. That night, I made a decision that would have consequences I couldn't have imagined. I called her father and told him I was ready to accept his offer, that I'd thought it over and decided he was right about us not being compatible long-term. He sounded relieved and pleased, like he'd successfully completed some difficult business transaction. We arranged to meet the next evening to finalize everything and exchange the money for my signed agreement. But instead of planning to disappear from his daughter's life, I decided to do something that would expose his true character and let her see what kind of man her father really was. I spent the day preparing for this meeting, thinking through every possible scenario, every way this could go wrong or right. I felt nervous, but also excited about the possibility of turning his own manipulation back on him. The meeting took place at a coffee shop downtown, somewhere public where he probably felt safe conducting his shady business. He brought the envelope again along with the contract and seemed eager to get everything signed and settled. I played my part perfectly, acting reluctant but ultimately convinced that this was the right decision for everyone involved. He actually seemed proud of himself for handling the situation so smoothly. I signed his contract, took his money, and shook his hand like we'd just completed a legitimate business deal. He reminded me about the terms of our agreement, especially the part about never contacting his daughter again, and I nodded along like I understood and accepted everything. He left the coffee shop looking satisfied, probably thinking he'd successfully protected his daughter from what he saw as a bad relationship. But here's the twist that even I didn't fully anticipate until it was happening. Instead of keeping the money and disappearing, I went straight home and told my girlfriend everything that had happened. I showed her the contract, the money, the text messages from her father, all the evidence of his attempt to buy me out of her life. I explained how he'd approached me, what he'd said about her and our relationship, how he'd made me feel like I was some kind of obstacle to her happiness. Her reaction was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, a mixture of hurt, anger, betrayal, and disbelief that someone she trusted could do something so manipulative and controlling. She went through all the emotions in rapid succession, from denial that her father could do such a thing, to anger at him for treating her like a child, to hurt that he'd gone behind her back instead of talking to her directly about his concerns. The most powerful moment came when she realized that this wasn't just about our relationship, but about her father's fundamental lack of respect for her autonomy and judgment. She started connecting dots about other times he'd interfered in her life, other relationships and friendships he'd tried to influence or control, other decisions he'd made for her without consulting her wishes. It was like watching someone wake up to a pattern of behavior they'd been blind to for years. What happened next surprised both of us and created a situation that none of us had anticipated. Instead of just confronting her father privately, she decided to turn this into a family meeting, inviting her mother, her brother, and even her grandmother to hear what had happened. She wanted everyone to understand what kind of person her father really was, how he tried to manipulate her life and her relationship through bribery and deception. The family meeting was intense and emotional, with lots of shouting, crying, and accusations flying back and forth. Her father initially tried to deny everything, then tried to justify his actions as protective parenting, then finally admitted what he'd done, but claimed he was only trying to help his daughter avoid a mistake. Her mother was horrified, her brother was angry, and her grandmother was disappointed in a way that seemed to cut deeper than any of the shouting. But the biggest surprise came when her mother revealed that this wasn't the first time her father had tried to interfere in their children's relationships. She told stories about other boyfriends and girlfriends who had mysteriously disappeared from their lives, other relationships that had ended suddenly without explanation. It turned out that her father had been playing puppet master with his family for years, and this was just the first time he'd been caught. The aftermath of this revelation tore their family apart in ways that I don't think any of us expected. Her parents separated, her brother stopped speaking to their father, and her grandmother made it clear that she was deeply disappointed in how her son had behaved. The whole family dynamic shifted, with alliances forming and old resentments coming to the surface that had been buried for decades. Meanwhile, my girlfriend and I had to figure out what to do with the money her father had given me. We talked about returning it, donating it, or using it for something meaningful, but ultimately decided to keep it as a reminder of what had happened and what we'd learned about standing up to manipulation. We put it in a savings account and called it our Independence Fund, money that would help us build a life together without anyone else's interference. The most unexpected development came a few weeks later when her father tried to apologize and rebuild his relationship with the family. He claimed he'd learned his lesson, that he understood how wrong he'd been, and that he wanted to make amends for what he'd done. But his apology felt hollow and calculated, like another manipulation tactic rather than genuine remorse for his actions. What really convinced us that he hadn't changed was when he started trying to turn other family members against me, spreading rumors about how I'd manipulated the situation and taken advantage of his daughter's emotions. He couldn't accept that his plan had backfired, that his daughter had chosen to stay with me despite his attempts to break us up. His need to control the narrative and maintain his position of authority in the family was stronger than his desire to actually make things right. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that taking his money and exposing his scheme was the right decision, even though it created a lot of chaos and pain for everyone involved. It revealed the truth about his character and his relationship with his daughter, and it gave her the opportunity to make her own choices about what kind of relationship she wanted to have with him moving forward. The experience taught me that sometimes the most manipulative people are the ones who claim to be protecting you, and that standing up to that kind of behavior requires courage and creativity. It also showed me that my girlfriend was stronger and more independent than I'd ever imagined, and that our relationship was built on a foundation of trust and respect that couldn't be bought or manipulated by outside forces. 6 months later, we're still together and stronger than ever, while her father continues to struggle with the consequences of his actions. The family is slowly healing, but it's a different kind of family now, one where honesty and respect are valued over control and manipulation. And that envelope full of money sits in our savings account, a reminder that sometimes the best way to defeat a manipulator is to use their own weapons against them. The whole experience changed how I think about family dynamics, relationships, and the importance of standing up for what's right even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. It also taught me that sometimes the most powerful response to manipulation is complete transparency, letting the truth speak for itself rather than trying to fight fire with fire. I never thought I'd be grateful for someone trying to bribe me to leave the person I love. But in a weird way, her father's scheme brought us closer together and helped us build a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us end up being the catalyst for the best changes in our lives, and this situation was definitely one of those times for us.